Hello and welcome to another video. I'm Paul Lucas and today I'm at Delhi's Indira Gandhi Airport. I'm flying Air India for the very first time today between here and Calcutta. I'm really interested to try out Air India. I've found that they're the carrier with the most wide spectrum of opinions online, so I'm really interested to see what I make of it today. I'm just heading into the terminal now to check in. Looking forward to it. Enjoy the video. My ride to the airport came courtesy of the one Uber driver in Delhi who actually seemed sane and competent. I tend to arrive at airports fairly early, just in case something happens and I need a little bit of barrier time. Something you need to know about Delhi Airport is you can't just walk into the check-in area and check in. No, you're going to need a printout or proof of travel as well as your passport just to get into the building. If you don't have that, then you will end up here at the ticket desks. Now, one thing you can't see behind me is there is a swirling black hole of bureaucracy happening just over my shoulder at the Air India ticket desk. I actually managed to forget my printout of my travel details in the hotel, and I've been here for 35 minutes waiting to get this simple printout of my travel details so I can get into the check-in area. So yeah, a bit of an inauspicious start to my experience here at Delhi, but certainly one that I'll chalk up to experience. Heading into check-in now, let's hope the experience improves a bit from here on in. In these pictures, Delhi Airport looks like any other in the developed world. However, it is a swirling maelstrom of bureaucracy and duplicated processes, which makes the landside experience quite frustrating. The check-in area here was for business class, but the queues were confusing and weren't properly policed, so it took me quite a while to be seen. My takeaway from the experience was to have reasonably low expectations and also to be more assertive about your own place in the queue. So I'm just heading off to international departures now. Delhi Airport check-in is an experience. If you're not used to it, it's certainly a culture shock. So there's about 15 kiosks in a row, and at about half of them there seems to be a stand-up row between the passenger and the check-in agent, so I'm not quite sure what's been going on here today or whether that's something you can normally expect from Air India. Anyway, when I got to my check-in, the girl that was dealing with me had two separate people behind her having separate conversations with two other guys who were over each of my shoulders, which was really confusing and chaotic, and I just don't know how people manage things here. I've been to places where people have been understaffed and overworked, and I've been to places where it's been the opposite, underworked and overstaffed with a culture of idleness, but this is probably the only place in the world where I can say it's overworked and overstaffed. There are staff everywhere and everyone is doing things at 100 miles an hour. It's absolute chaos. Anyway, off to departures now, and I'm having fun, you know. The one cool thing about the check-in experience was the fact that business class passengers get a gold embossed boarding pass. Not only does that make you feel extra special, the business class boarding pass will also get you into the Air India lounge, which is on the mezzanine level just through security. Air India is in Star Alliance, so passengers travelling on Star Alliance carriers in business class or who have elite status with any Star Alliance carrier flying in Star Alliance will also get entry to this particular lounge. Other than a lack of an apron view, this is actually not too bad a lounge given that my flight was just going to be 2 hours across to Calcutta. I have to say though that none of the food really looked particularly appetising, but then again I'm not a massive fan of Indian food, so that wasn't a surprise to me. Let me know what you think of the food options in the comment section below. I had about an hour to kill here, so I just sat down and went on Instagram and completed a Q&A session with some of my followers there. You should definitely consider following me on other forms of social media which are appearing on the screen now. By the way, airside at Delhi Airport there is an aviator flight simulator. Let me know if you've ever used that and whether you've seen that facility anywhere airside at any airport before. As you'd expect in the Indian capital, Air India has a strong presence here, but there's also good representation from Britain too. Both British Airways and Virgin Atlantic fly to London Heathrow direct from Delhi. Air India provide priority boarding for all business class passengers and Star Alliance Gold customers.
Something else which caught my eye is the fact that there were actually 2 jet bridges on this Boeing 787-8. That's really helpful because it means that business class get their own jet bridge and won't be disturbed by economy class passengers passing through them while they're putting their things away during boarding.
Oh yes. Thank you. Hello.
Welcome on board, sir. To and from this way, please.
Thank you very much.
Air India were a very early customer of the Boeing 787 and have gone for the standard Boeing 222 configuration in business class. All of these seats recline into a fully flat bed. You can find similar setups on LOT, LATAM and Azerbaijan Airlines amongst others. If the ground experience was a little bit lacking, I couldn't say the same about the service once I stepped on board. Just a few minutes after I settled into my seat, the cabin crew came round with a selection of drinks. There was a choice of water or mango lassi, which is a kind of yogurt-based drink. The consistency is more like a smoothie, but it was still quite refreshing and definitely a change from the other pre-departure beverages I've had on other carriers recently. Delhi to Calcutta is 815 miles and it takes around 2 hours to make the journey at 35,000 feet. The entertainment options, at least on this flight, were fairly limited. While the screen's an okay size, it is actually quite far away from you, so it looks a lot smaller than it is. I was content just to have a look at some of the travel inspiration themed videos. Air India also provide English language newspapers even on these short domestic flights. Once we reached cruising altitude, the pleasant and friendly crew were on hand to serve us our lunch. Many Indians don't eat meat and that leads to a more extensive menu. There are 4 main course options on this flight, which is pretty impressive. I went for probably the mildest option, the saffron chicken curry. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this being served in foil, but then again, it's just a domestic flight and the fare was extremely cheap. I surprised myself by just how much I enjoyed this main course, although I wasn't really a fan of the salad or the dessert. There's also a hot bread which is served in foil to keep it warm. Also supplied on this flight is a full-length blanket, which is pretty thin and not of the standard that you'd see on the international flights they serve, but still pretty good nonetheless. This is just a 2-hour domestic flight, so bear in mind that some of the services, including the food and the blanket, are slightly downgraded from the long-haul intercontinental routes Air India offers. Moving on to the seats, they're actually pretty wide and quite comfortable. They're much wider than a lot of business class seats because these simply face straight forward and don't have to tessellate with other seats in the configuration. There are also USB and universal chargers available. The tray table itself actually deploys from the centre console and in my case was quite stiff. I needed to put the camera down and use 2 hands just to get this to go flat. But once it was deployed it was perfectly okay to use and swivels slightly to allow you out. Some fairly basic headphones were also provided for the in-flight entertainment and the sound was okay considering they were fairly cheap. There's also a reading lamp in case you're old-fashioned and want to do some reading off paper, and there's endlessly adjustable options available on the centre console. These seats lie flat, but beware, there is absolutely no privacy partition at all on these seats. That's the major downside with this configuration. Window seats don't get direct aisle access and have to step over sleeping passengers, and there is also no privacy at all for any passengers. I quite like flicking through airline magazines, and as well as an advert here advertising European destinations with Air India, there's also a compelling chairman's welcome. Now, this particularly caught my eye because he's used this opportunity to lecture Air India's passengers on some relatively obvious things they shouldn't be doing on board aircraft. While I didn't witness any strange behaviour myself, there are kind of clues to it all over the place in this airline experience. This toilet here otherwise looks perfectly functional. It's clean and pleasant, but there's a rather interesting sign on the wall. It turns out that people have been flushing night suits, that is their pyjamas, down the toilet. So some very quick summing up remarks. The main reason that I took this flight is to test Air India out and make some content for this channel, but also because I've seen that Air India's business class is actually quite cheap if you're travelling from Europe to the Far East, and I wanted to test it out to make sure that it would be a suitable product in the future. Overall, I've found the ground experience to be frustrating, time-consuming, and extremely bureaucratic. The experience in the air was quite different, with kind and personal service from the two flight attendants working my aisle. So from this one experience, I can probably conclude that Air India has good people working in a bad system. The fare paid for this trip was 16,345 Indian rupees one way. That's £191. That's all for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.